Aloha and good afternoon. It is 2:32 p.m. on Wednesday, February 7th, 2024, and I call the Committee on Housing, Sustainability, and Health meeting to order. I'd like to welcome the following members who are present in Council Chamber: Committee Vice Chair Kia Aina and Council Members Dos Santos Tam and Okimoro. I believe Councilmember Toba is excused momentarily. Pursuant to Hawaii Vice Statute Section 92-3.7, this meeting will be conducted as a remote meeting by interactive conference technology with the following procedures in effect for the meeting. Members of the public will be allowed to provide oral testimony remotely or in person in the council chamber on all items on the agenda when each item is taken up. All persons who register to testify in person will be called upon first, followed by those who register to testify remotely. Persons who have not registered will be given an opportunity to testify following the registered testifiers. For those standing by remotely, please utilize the Zoom raise hand feature to indicate your desire to speak. For those joining us by telephone only, please press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. I'll identify you by the last 3 digits of your phone number. When your number is called, you can press *6 to unmute yourself when prompted. Before testifying, each person shall state their full name and will be limited to 1-minute presentation on each item. HRS Section 92-3.7 requires all votes at a remote meeting to be conducted by roll call unless unanimous. I'll first call for objections, and if there are any, I will call for a roll call vote. For those council members participating from outside of the council chamber under HRS Section 92-3.7, the meeting will automatically recess if we lose audio-visual contact with you and cannot reconvene until we reestablish contact. Therefore, please announce beforehand if you'll be voluntarily signing out of the meeting. Don't believe we have any council members participating remotely today. Written testimonies, including the testifier's address, email address, and phone number, will be available to the public as described on the posted agenda. As a courtesy, please turn off all cell phones, and we'll move to agenda item number 1. I'd like to welcome Councilmember Toba to chamber as well. And this is an item for action, Bill 1, 2024, relating to herbal cigarettes. I believe the administration has Dr. Ireland present, Director of Department of Emergency Services. Members, I'll ask if there are any questions for the department at this time. I just would note that Councilmember Dos Santos, would you like to add anything on this bill after? Okay, so with that, we'll go to Madam Clerk. I don't believe we have any registered, or do we have any registered testifiers online or present?
Chair, there are none.
Okay, if anyone online can raise their hand, and I don't see any, so I'll just ask anyone in the chamber to come forward that was wishing to testify. And sensing none or seeing none, we'll go into discussion. Councilmember Dos Santos, Dan.
Well, thank you, Chair, for hearing this bill and for co-introducing it with me. I think this is a common sense measure given that the state raised the age for tobacco cigarettes from 18 to 21. Because the state's powers extend just to tobacco cigarettes, our county prohibition on purchases of herbal cigarettes by those 18 and under stayed in effect. And since the state moved it up, it makes sense for us to do the same. This is honestly really a cleanup bill more than anything. Of course, the harms of smoking any kind of combustible substance on youth is well established, but really this is, I think, cleaning it up and making it match state statute. So thank you for hearing this bill, and hopefully it moves through.
I appreciate that description and explanation. Don't have anything to add, but agree and appreciate Councilmember Dos Santos Tam's leadership on this item. Was there any other discussion from committee members? Vice Chair Kia Aina.
Well, just educational-wise, I'm not a smoker. I had a very strict upbringing. There is no smoking of anything in the household. So I don't know what herbal cigarettes are. Are they found at stores? How are they different from cigarettes?
Councilmember.
Yeah, thank you. You know, this has become a lot less common because of vaping and sort of the availability of flavors, and we went through this with that other bill a few months ago. But I guess people make smokable, things out of cloves and spices and other leaves, mint, and apparently catnip. I didn't realize that was something humans did. But anyway, I guess this is something that's not super common, but we might as well take care of while we're at it.
Okay, but they can get it from like 7-Eleven and any kind of stores?
Yeah, so again, I think now that vaping is so much more common, it's less so. But when this bill, when this language was originally proposed in the early 2000s, apparently you could get it in vending machines because there was a part in the law where it said if it's in a vending machine, you have to have a disclaimer that it's only those 18 and over. So, hopefully this isn't widely sold, and hopefully this doesn't affect that many folks. But the reality is we should just clean things up.
Thank you for your explanation, and thank you guys for following up.
Of course. And just to, further that discussion, I don't see it as a particularly controversial measure, but understanding that we have, different ages on the books, and this, generally the smoking age is seen as 21 when the state raised it. And of course, from an enforcement perspective, it would make sense just to have a streamlined framework and age, especially, in the case that the counties are given back that authority. I know with Hawaii Island passing a similar bill to the last one we did on flavored tobacco products, and then the bill's going through the legislature right now, that it's an ongoing conversation. But regardless of that outcome, I think, as Councilmember Dos Santos-Tam mentioned, it really is a cleanup measure just to provide a consistent legal framework for the county to have on its books. Was there any other discussion from council members? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and recommend that Bill 1, 2024 be reported out for passage on second reading and scheduling of a public hearing. Any discussion on that, or any objections or reservations? Hearing none, so ordered. And so that brings us to agenda item number 2. Resolution 24-16, adopting the Climate Ready Oahu as a climate adaptation strategy and guiding policy document for the city and county of Honolulu. For your information, we do have a presentation available online, is Mayor's Message 18, and I believe that was disseminated to committee members as well. We do have Executive Director Matt Gonser present if you wanted to go ahead and proceed when you're ready.
Sure. Aloha. Good afternoon. Thank you, Committee Chair Wire, Vice Chair Kia'aina, and members of the committee. My name is Matt Gonser, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Mayor's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency, and I'm joined by some members of our team. You'll hear from Alex Yee, the Coastal and Water Program Manager, as part of this brief presentation, but we're also joined by Chase McDaniel and Claire Rossi de Leon. We're very excited to be re-engaging Council on the city's first ever climate adaptation strategy. It's always the right time. It's never the wrong time to talk about climate, and it's really important that we now, as a city, have an opportunity to adopt this strategy and hold ourselves accountable to knowing what the risks are and advancing the strategies and the actions that were developed by city agencies along with the community. So to kick us right off, though we are here to talk about adaptation, one side of the current climate crisis, it is always important to remind ourselves that climate is a both and both and includes mitigation, so reducing and eliminating the source of what is causing climate change, and our exposure to climate risks will only continue to increase until we stop putting carbon into the atmosphere and making it that much more difficult for ourselves to keep communities safe, healthy, and thriving into the future. And that is why the city has a climate action plan. And when we are successful in implementing that climate action plan, we will also have more cleaner renewable energy. We will have cleaner, safer transportation choices for people to move around community and continue to enjoy living here. Climate adaptation, excuse me, is needed to adjust to the impacts that we are already experiencing today and to continue to prepare ourselves for tomorrow. And really following years of deep community engagement and visioning in partnership with a previous administration, this administration, previous council leadership, and this council leadership, we've been developing these work plans through the resilience strategy, now the climate action plan, and it was very evident that we now needed to include adaptation strategy into the portfolio of work for the city and for the office in coordinating actions with the other agencies. And actually, excuse me, what we're here to talk about today, Climate Ready Oahu, is Resilience Action 28 from the 2019 Resilience Strategy. So this carries forward, validates, and implements those early identified needs in that process. As a city and a state, we do have very clear climate action targets. And again, those are the goals to reduce and eliminate carbon pollution, which is trapping excess heat in the atmosphere and causing us to even think about the need to adapt to the impacts. But really, as a result of the historic and ongoing carbon pollution, we know that we are locked into some degree of continued change into the future, some degree of increasing temperatures, some degree of increasing sea level rise, more erratic storms, et cetera. And we need to prepare ourselves, and that's what we're here to talk about today. It's really about establishing this vision for what it looks like for our island to adjust to what we're experiencing today and to continue to take those proactive measures to address these climate hazards and these risks. And Alex will talk in more detail about the vision, how that came to be. He'll provide more insight into the structure of the strategy itself. And then, though we can't cover every specific strategy and action in this meeting, we wanted to provide you a couple of examples that show implementation underway while recognizing more work is certainly needed moving forward. To ground ourselves, this is a science-based, community-driven approach, and really using the best available information across what the city's Climate Change Commission can provide us, what the National Climate Assessment is informing us, as well as the expertise within city agencies that have had to grapple with and deal with these impacts through a risk assessment that looked at the likelihood of any particular event or increasing risk from sea level rise and heat, and the consequence from those hazards. And through that risk assessment, this is what we have in front of us in terms of our top 5 climate hazard risks that we're trying to address. But we also recognize that sometimes there can be cascading impacts from a prolonged period of drought, which then has heavy rainfall and the consequences of increased landslides or erosion as a result. So we want to make sure that we're clear-eyed and open about the potential consequences of multiple hazards at any point in time. And just to remind ourselves again, climate is not a tomorrow issue. I mentioned we have really tremendous data here in the state locally, over a century's worth of sea level rise information right out the window here at Honolulu Harbor. We've measured at least 2 degrees of temperature increase on a statewide average since the 1950s, with real market increase in hot nights and warmer days. And you can see a smattering of these impacts that we're experiencing today from all around the island, your districts and the other council members' districts, including impacts to beach parks and subsurface infrastructure, damages and disruptions to homes and businesses, as well as real threats to life and safety, recreation, and our ability to remain connected to place. So before I hand it off to Alex, again, to go into more detail about the structure, the strategies, and a couple of examples of actions underway, we did want to share with you the process that had gone through. This is about 2.5 years, almost 3 years worth of work, direct community engagement with community members all around the island through multiple rounds of surveys, multiple rounds of in-person and virtual engagement. We greatly benefited from a 40-person community advisory hui made up of people across industry, business, education, environmental areas, and cultural resources that also are place-based so that we had geographic distribution. And really there are some key themes that came from this that really help set the stage for the structure of a vision, strategies, and the implementable actions. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex, who was the project lead, to talk us through a little bit more in detail.
Mahalo, Matt. Alexander Yee, Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. So as Matt introduced very well, based on the data and information from the risk assessment and vulnerability assessment that we did, in addition to all of the things that we heard from the community during the extensive community outreach that we did in the development of this strategy. These are some of just the guiding themes that informed how the city is now approaching climate adaptation. So the first one is really an acknowledgement that our exposure to climate risks will only continue to increase until we stop putting carbon into the atmosphere and making it that much more difficult for us to do adaptation, which means keeping communities safe, healthy, and thriving. The second one is local impacts needing local solutions. You know, this one was really a theme that resonated with residents as we were out talking in community, taking this global issue of climate change and boiling it down to the impacts that it has to you as a resident or to you as a homeowner, and thinking about the solutions that would be needed to address those impacts being place-specific. Malam Aina is obviously the foundation of a lot of this work, and the basis for a lot of this work is a yes and for the city's kuleana to care for the land and deeply rooted worldview that recognizes the environment as kin, a system of values based on passing down of responsibility through generations. Equity is important, particularly for climate adaptation, because we know that climate change doesn't impact everywhere and everyone equally, right? The impacts are not evenly distributed or felt. Certain parts of the island are going to be dealing with certain types of climate impacts, whether that's sea level rise, flooding, or drought, more than others. And we also know that even within the same neighborhood, two neighbors could be impacted by the same climate hazard differently, depending on their own circumstances. So keeping all of that in mind and making sure that we're not leaving anyone behind in this transition to a climate-ready Oahu is really key. And then lastly, I think this is really important, this concept of climate adaptation by any other name is kind of just a way to acknowledge the fact that there is a lot of really great and important community work happening all over this island already. And maybe not all of that is being done because of climate adaptation per se, like as an intention. However, a lot of that work does end up having climate adaptation benefits. It does end up contributing to and benefiting climate adaptation outcomes. And so, a great example of that is clearing invasive species, restoring watersheds, and restoring water flow for what lo'i or lo'ikalu ends up having a fire break benefit, right, in reducing the fire risk to communities. So celebrating and uplifting and recognizing where that work overlaps with the goals of climate adaptation is a really important way of making sure that we're bringing everybody that it can help to the table to be part of that solution, which is part of navigating a climate-ready future together. So the document itself, Climate Ready Oahu, is really a way for the city to boil down all of the things that Matt talked about. It's a very complex and wide-ranging topic, climate adaptation, and it's a way for us to communicate this in a clear and strategic city vision. So the vision statement that we developed for climate adaptation on Oahu includes 3 parts. The first is prepared and empowered people. The second is safeguarded and stewarded Aina, and the third is safe and reliable infrastructure. I like to call these people, places, and things, but really at the end of the day, being able to boil this down into these 3 categories, I think is a way of providing a workable framework for addressing these hazards with solutions. The way that it's structured is that within each of these parts of the vision, there are strategies. There are 12 strategies overall in this document, and we like to think of these strategies as the big ideas in climate adaptation. So these are going to be the types of things that we hope we'll be able to lead with when we're communicating with community so that people and residents can understand why it is that the city is prioritizing the actions that we are, what it is that we're hoping to accomplish, They're also the types of ideas that are never really going to be completable or completed. So looking at this first example in people, amplifying and increasing capacity for community-led climate adaptation is always going to be the right approach. We're never going to be done doing that. However, we hope that these big ideas, these strategies, will really serve as a way for us to build coalitions of support, rally people behind important causes. But of course, those big ideas themselves are not enough. And so each of those strategies is also supported by implementable actions. Overall, there are 57 such actions in this document. And a quick introduction to what an action looks like. In addition to the normal things that you might expect in a plan, so the description, the time frame, the important stakeholders and partners, something that we felt was very important to include is this section at the bottom called Actions You Can Take. We really wanted community members to see themselves in this document. We wanted to help provide this sense of empowerment that we all have a role to play in climate adaptation. And most importantly, this was something that we heard during the community outreach, is that community members are consistently asking us, what can we do? What more can we do? They want to be part of the solution. And so this was a way to be responsive to that. I mentioned earlier that there are 57 actions in this document. While we are eager to see this resolution advance and for the city to adopt this climate adaptation strategy, that doesn't mean that we're waiting to start implementing on these actions. So I'm going to introduce just 3 examples, one from each of those vision parts of actions that are already underway. So this first one is called the Climate Champions Program, and this is something that we're very proud of. This was developed in response, again, to things that we heard from the community, that there was capacity out there, that we needed to identify ways that the city could support and uplift and celebrate community action. And so this is really a program that we developed from the ground up in partnership with community-based organizations that we worked with in the community outreach portion to identify climate adaptation projects that both advance the missions of these organizations and the goals of this strategy, and providing resources behind that overlap to make sure that this is happening together. And we were, I'm happy to report, able to secure a federal grant to fund this program, and we'll be launching it in partnership with community over the next 3 years. The second example I want to leave you with is about the Clean Water and Natural Lands Fund. So as you may be familiar, the Clean Water and Natural Lands Fund is a special fund in the city for acquisition of conservation of real property interests in land for purposes of conservation and management. This fund was recently the subject of a charter amendment question on the last electoral ballot. And in the aftermath of that ballot amendment, expanding the scope of what some of the funds can be used to fund, which now include maintenance for the lands that have been acquired. We've been working in partnership with the Department of Land Management. So I raise this example because it's, I think, a good way of it's a good example of how we're looking at improvements to existing programs. We're working across the city, working in partnership, and rethinking what the city's role can look like when necessary. And then the last example I have here for you is our updated tree inventory and asset management system, Action 12.1. So this is something that the Department of Parks and Recreation Division of Urban Forestry has been leading on. Obviously, taking care of the city's urban canopy is a huge kuleana that is an existing city kuleana. And this is really in response to two kind of disturbing trends that we see in the canopy, which is increasing heat and decreasing canopy. And so how can we better manage the assets and responsibilities that we already have? This is sort of a way to improve the asset management, to better manage what we can now measure. So this is another example of ways in which we're supporting partners across the city. So this document, Climate Ready Oahu, is not a document just for the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency, but it truly is a document for the entire city organization. With that, I'll turn it back over to Director Gonser, but thank you, and we will be available for questions. Mahalo.
Great, thank you. And that really does wrap up the information we wanted to share with you here today. Just for the last bit of context, you may remember that we were here in September and we gave a briefing on the status of this work at that time. And then through the month of November, we had a public review draft towards through November through the end of the year. You can see all of the direct comments that we got and how that informed the final version that's now in front of you at the website, Climate Ready Oahu. So there you can find a few things. The full document, an executive summary, and that full matrix that provides the direct responses to the nearly 200 comments that we received during that period. Happy to take questions.
Appreciate that, and appreciate the presentation. Noting on page 128 through 30, the action summary I think is particularly helpful as well, overviewing each individual action item as well as the time frame that it's anticipated. Are there any questions from the committee? And if you want to mull questions over, unless you had some now, Vice Chair.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the presentation for you and your staff. I felt that when we met, we had a very productive meeting. And so I won't bore everybody to death here today, but let me just maybe prioritize an area that I feel that the city collectively, not just your office, could do a better job in. And that relates to, on page 129, facilitating a climate resilient local food system. And of course, we have the city's community garden network, which is under the Department of Parks and Recreation. And I just looked on your website to see how many there are, and there's only 10. So of course I support an increase in that, not just in underserved neighborhoods, but all neighborhoods, period, right? In my area, we only have one in Kaneohe, we don't have one in Kailua, and we don't have one in Waimanalo. But what I'm worried about is that we don't have a lot of lands, of course. And what little lands we have been prioritizing, if we can, affordable housing units, right? So I guess what I would encourage your office to do is to work with the state's Department of Land and Natural Resources. They have a lot of ag lands, as well as the Department of Agriculture, and they might be very willing to provide a lease arrangement whereby the city would run a community garden. But I do want to applaud you for at least building this in, because even for me, I had to think about it. I'm working with the Department of Community Services on a potential 15-acre site in Waimanalo for an affordable housing project, and that may fall through the cracks because the land may not be conducive for it. There was a bonsai farm there, right? Well, maybe we should look at that for a community garden for Waimanalo, because the Hawaiian community, they have no access. In fact, they've told me they don't even have, unless it's in your yard, they don't even have access to lo'i, like a lot in Ko'olauloa have access to, right? So I'm just saying it's very exciting, but I think that we cannot limit some of these ideas to city property. So I look forward to, it says here near that you are identifying city lands. I just recommend that you not limit it to city lands and to have some vibrant discussions with those agencies that I told you about, because everybody wants to thrive, right? But, and then again, with regard to underserved communities, do not limit it to it, because maybe a lot of it might be in the urban core. We need community gardens everywhere. And I think you'd get a lot of support from communities.
Great, thank you, Council Member. And certainly a lot of great points. We're jotting down the guidance, and that's what we're really looking towards now, the best ways that we can carry forward and implement this work, further informed by your all's guidance, the opportunities and capacities within departments, but also working with our state and community partners. And just to that other broader comment of like, you were excited to see this even as a strategy, we also acknowledge that we don't have the answers for all of these things yet, but we thought it was extremely important through this process to, one, identify the hazards and risks, and to be really open and honest about what it will take to address those hazards and risks, inclusive of some things that maybe isn't really how we operate now, but we have to find ways to better partner and scale up the work. And that's really what we're focused on right now, prioritization of the actions with departments, getting this direct feedback from you all, and then thinking how we can scale up and really get back to the work of implementing this. As Alex mentioned, there's a lot of stuff that we knew was right to do, and we wanted to make sure that was captured in the strategy, but that we weren't waiting to continue the good work.
Thank you. And then just lastly on 8.6 on page 129, as I mentioned, you don't just have to have gardens. You could look for infrastructure to support increased long-term capacity to store, refrigerate, and distribute food. That clearly would align with agricultural use. And so I just, let me know how I can help you.
I did want to acknowledge with council's support in FY24, we were able to convert what had been about a 3.5-year grant-funded position into a general funded position. You may recall Dexter Kishida, who is now the deputy director of the State Department of Ag. With your support, we were able to really establish this food security and sustainability program manager within CCSR. And I know our sister office of OER is equally interested in really solidifying the foundation for the kind of work that we all now must do coming out of the COVID pandemic.
Thank you. Good job, you guys.
Appreciate the questions and the framework and all the work that's gone into the planning. So where do we go from here in terms of the implementation? I mean, I'm curious as we get the proposed budget in March, if we'll be able to, clearly identify, or there'll be like a inventory that identifies maybe which CIP projects fall under which particular action item, or is that kind of on the table?
We can certainly help, perhaps not in time for those first hearings, especially as we go through department by department. And we also recognize that this was being worked on concurrently with the shaping of the FY25 budget, but the next year's budget is not the end-all be-all in terms of further aligning the efforts and the resources for these actions, but we can definitely be available to provide any answers to questions that you may have or help you see where some of the department's priorities fit within these, but again, recognizing that more work is needed to be done. In terms of where you said, where do we go? Hopefully we go to full council on the 28th for final adoption, but then we want to make sure that we're reconnecting with the departments and relaunching this as a new portfolio of work with the whole team moving forward.
Okay, and so it seems like CCSR is going to kind of be the point person in working with departments to comply with and work through their projects and their policy suggestions lining up with the strategy.
We can certainly help to be a point of contact. So actually, through an ordinance that passed at the end of 2020, before the administration change, it articulated a city climate adaptation policy that said CCSR and Alex's program in particular is to coordinate actions and policies. A lot of this will obviously get carried out by either collaborations or a specific department, but we can help be the keeper of all that information and help bridge any of the tracking of the implementation moving forward, which we already do for the Climate Action Plan on an annual basis in the city's annual sustainability report. We would envision something similar. We don't yet know what it might look like, but at minimum, an annual stock take to see where we are on some of these actions.
Yeah, no, that would be extremely helpful and then I think both in addition to the upcoming CIP budget, when we're talking about, say, vulnerable infrastructure, if at some point, and again, it might not be available yet, it sounds like, because this is just in the initial phases, having like an inventory of where all the needs are identified, right, in terms of fitting them specifically into each action item, and then being able to identify, like, as we discuss our priorities with the administration too, and the community's priorities, right? Like, how do we want to fit that into the budget?
Yeah, and at a later date, we'd love to come back to even help you understand the kinds of vulnerability assessments that departments have done. With council's support in the tranche two money of FRF, we're near ready to embark on this interagency One Water infrastructure plan. That will take a couple of years, but that in and of itself actually is one of the actions, Action 9.1. So we're trying to find all the ways and bring resources to bear externally or find ways to align the city's internal resources to carry out the work.
I appreciate that. And just to kind of highlight a couple, because I agree with Vice Chair about food security, food sustainability. I think stream maintenance in particular has been a headache for the city for decades. I don't know if that's fair longer. I don't think it's purely a city responsibility in the sense that you have state, private property, other jurisdictions, possibly federal, depending on where the outline issues are, maybe at the stream head or whatnot. But I noticed that capacity and partnerships for stream maintenance was in that medium time frame, like 5 to 10 years. But then I do see that there's also a more short-term issue of slowing the runoff and whatnot. And so can you just, to the extent that you're familiar with the issue, because I know DFM has responsibilities in this area as well, like what's kind of going on right now with stream maintenance and flooding issues? Because I know it's affecting other communities, but particularly in District 2, the whole expanse is seeing implications from that.
Yeah, that's certainly a big question, and you have the biggest geographic district and some of the biggest watersheds as well. And for the Haleiwa area, I mean, it comes up regularly on the monthly neighborhood board meetings. Senator Quinlan has been trying to advance, recognizing that a lot of those are not lands that the city has direct influence or control over, and where we do have maintenance responsibility is oftentimes in the lowlands where you're trying to mitigate water that's coming from a big reach up in the mountains. But the intentions around these strategies are to accelerate, advance, and make more common the kinds of things that you're seeing, say, at Alawai Golf Course or Alawai Community Park, or now, though it's taking some time, near Kalapawai in Kailua, right? Those different kinds of road practices that we know we can do more of in terms of capturing water where it rains, directing flows into areas where we can slow it down, spread it out, and hopefully soak it in. But then on the partnership side, I think you're right. The different jurisdictions of these stream reaches continues to be a confusion for residents often. And we also know that there are certain organizations that are really trying to position themselves to be not just picking up rubbish on a monthly basis or in Earth Month, but really find ways that we don't yet know how to sort of unleash the opportunity and the capacities that are out in community.
I'll definitely appreciate that. And I think also in the sense that to the extent that the city needs better capacity for even activities going on private land, right? What maybe is in non-compliance with the law and could be noticed or, cited as a violation, or, in terms of being more proactive, and even if it's as simple as getting into like a regular system where it's like, you have the inspectors go out and cite, it doesn't happen within a certain amount of time, the city just does it, and then the city bills and whatnot, right? Like, I don't know how we get to that point, but it seems like if that's something like our office wanted to dive through, if I look at page 78, the stream maintenance partnerships, we could say, reach out and be like, ask DFM, BWS, DLM, and maybe CCSR to do a sit down and talk through ideas. Is that kind of how you see that operating?
Yeah, certainly now that this information's out there, right, the whole point is to put a strategy out. That there's a lot of exposure when you do that, but it's important to acknowledge what is needed to be done to address these issues. So we would welcome the opportunity for further discussion on any of those actions. Hopefully they're also aligned with some of our near-term priorities and capabilities, but we're always here to try to innovate and partner towards the solutions that are needed.
Appreciate that. And it extends beyond the city. So like I'm looking at like 8.2, talking about agricultural practices. You have DOA, DOFA, UH. So it really is a good tool, I think, for any issue in here that maybe a council member's office wants to work on. Like we know who to convene to kind of talk through, you know, what we could be doing collaboratively. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and we're always happy to be a first point of contact if you're thinking through how best to try to rally the troops.
Okay, mahalo. Any additional questions or discussion? Okay, thank you, Director. Appreciate that. Also, Mr. Gee. Or Yee, yeah, Yee. Okay. Yeah. Madam Clerk, do we have any registered in-person or online testifiers?
Chair, there are none.
Thank you. If anyone's online to testify, you can use the raise hand function, but I don't see any at this time, so I would ask if anyone in chamber wishes to testify, and seeing none, we'll close testimony and ask if there's any additional discussion from the committee. With that, the chair is going to recommend that Resolution 24-16 be reported out for adoption. Are there any discussion, objections, or reservations? Hearing none, so ordered. Okay, and then that brings us to agenda item number 3, which is informational briefing. Presentation. Actually, this item was canceled, I think, yeah. My apologies. Just as a note, agenda item number 3 has been canceled. Presentation on the sequential intercept model. Potentially rescheduled for the next committee meeting, but please just look at the agenda for the next meeting if you're interested in that item. We'll go to agenda item number 4, update on city's homelessness services. For your information, the presentation is available online as Departmental Communication 90 and Departmental Communication 93. I believe we have Deputy Director ready to go with the DCS presentation, so we'll turn it over to you first.
So aloha and good afternoon. My name is Edward Los Banos, Deputy Director of Department of Community Services. With me today, I have Melanie Asun. She recently joined the Department of Community Services, and she's the lead planner for our HONU program. To address the city's homeless services today, Chair Wire had asked me to talk about the HONU program in particular. It started as a pilot back in 2019. I'm sure every time I hire a staff at HONU, I have to fill out a unbudgeted staffing request that brought to council. I'm sure you've seen those, but primarily focus on that and where the program stands and whether it's worthy of expansion. So that's kind of what I'm prepared to discuss today. I know the agenda is much broader. To the extent I'm able to answer any questions on the broader topic of homeless services, happy to entertain any comments and questions on that after we talk about HONU here. So HONU in the context of the city's homeless strategy, which is, in small text on your screen, but basically what our focus is trying to get folks on the street to engage the system, our network of homeless services and programs that we provide. And once they're in the system, work with them to service those decisions, keep them, and then after that, keep them in our network of services. So what HONU does in particular, it's a low barrier, 24/7 shelter that literally meets people where they're at because it's a mobile shelter. If there are folks interested in seeking shelter, we also have a 24/7 transportation contract that'll shuttle folks from around the island to wherever HONU's at. Once they're in HONU, just the magic of the stabilization that occurs. So folks, living on the street, sometimes they're not eating, they don't get to eat, they don't have the resources, they don't have the means. Sometimes they're worried about sleeping at night because what might happen to them at night. So just any of those two factors make it hard for them to make a good decision. On top of that, most of the folks, as we know from the point in time count, are suffering from a mental illness or including some kind of addiction as well. So when folks have those moments of clarity, it's really important for us to capitalize on them, and that's why HONU was established. We bring them in there, and whether it's most of our referrals come from HPD, they don't need to be specialists on how to navigate them. They'll bring them to DCS over at HONU, and we'll work through those services and get them prepared to go. Once they're at HONU, we also work with them to prepare them for some kind of other housing or shelter. Sometimes they need their IDs, whatever they may need. Sometimes they have a lot of stuff, and shelters can't handle a lot of stuff, let alone if we're able to place them in housing, they can't handle a lot of stuff. There's no storage for that. Sometimes they have multiple pets, and working with them to place those things responsibly or find something for their cherished items that they have. Recently, at HONU, we've started accepting walk-ins, and we started to coordinate with CORE to provide them opportunities. Because again, like I said, initially we were primarily focused with law enforcement, their engagement on the street. But as we create more of these opportunities and programs engaging people on the street, just working with them to create opportunities for them to, for their clients to find respite. As far as HONU guidelines, admission guidelines, it's basically a campsite. So there are inherent limitations on who we can accommodate at HONU. Some of the admission guidelines are for safety of our staff and the other people at HONU. So, no alcohol use, no drug use, no substance use. We do allow smoking because we understand some of these folks do smoke, and they're going through a stressful time in their life if they are seeking help through HONU. And some of it's physical. So probably the biggest one is that they have to be able to perform their daily living activities without the assistance of staff. That's using the bathroom, getting up off the ground, because like I said, it's a campsite, yeah. When it comes to HONU operations, what we require for a site is a space large enough to accommodate 10 Zoom row tents with a central mess area or a community area. It's generally in a rectangular formation, but that 10 Zoom row thing is a kind of a big, heavy lift there. Access to water, we do have portable showers, permit smoking in tents, in order to help with their transition. So some of our clients here at HONU are high need, right? So sometimes we get people have that moment of clarity, they come to us HONU. But sometimes we also get people that are fleeing the streets as well. And this is kind of a powerful thing that I know my staff get emotional about, because sometimes we do have sex traffickers trying to get into our site to try and remove people from our site. We got drug dealers trying to force their way into our site to find their clients. We have a lot of people out there that that work really hard to keep their clientele or whatever it is, but try to get them back into their bad routine of habits. And to that extent, can't stress how much support HPD provides us, and why they're necessary, right? We couldn't do that with security if somebody tries to barge in, force their way into our site to take somebody, a spouse in an abusive relationship coming in to try and pick up their wife and their kids out of there and force their way out of there, yeah. That said, some of the operating constraints we run into is, or one of the biggest complaint I get about HONU is HONU's always full. I think that's why Chair Wire had asked, is there more capacity for more HONU? Currently, I want to address that full comment, because currently we can accommodate 40 to 60 people. And sometimes when we get the referral, it depends on what kind of referral it is. So when I said there's 10 tents, we have two tents as a command and supply tent, 2 tents for single males, just based on the demographic and our experience. 1 single females tent, 2 tents for families, 1 tent for couples, and then we have 2 tents that are kind of flexible based on what we got. When I was out there on the site this past weekend, I did see a transgender tent, for example, which I thought was really cool. That's an inclusive program. I should have known better that something like that would exist, but it's good to see it. But that said, if I get a single males or a single female referral and the tents are full, but I have 1 opening in a single male tent, there's no way I'm going to put that single female in a single male tent, just because that's where the opening is. And that's why sometimes it depends on what kind of referral I get, and sometimes I might have to say no because I just don't have a safe place to locate them, yeah. There's also areas where we put intake on hold sometimes when there's weather events. This past weekend, we did have to kind of shut down Honu operations, move it up to Kalihi Valley. The heavy winds, ripped up one of our tents. Gus got a hold of it, actually lifted up the tent off the ground and actually tore it apart. So it is weather sensitive. Sometimes we move for heavy rain events if the site's prone to flooding and things like that. We also have, so we're not moving a lot of people. When we move Honu, relocate from, say, Waipahu Cultural Gardens to Keahi Lagoon like we recently did, we kind of slow down intake so we don't have to move a full Honu, from one place to another. We're not relocating with 60 people. So those are some of the barriers that we have. But Honu, for the most part, operates at pretty full capacity. Sometimes we aren't able to accommodate people, but it's something that we're really trying hard to do. Also want to share here on the slide, the success rate of Honu. So we have about 54% rate. So 3,667 touches, and we had just under 2,000 placements on there, yeah? Honu over time, just because I want to show the impact of 1 to 2 Honus, but I also want to demonstrate the flexibility of the Honu program as a city-run operation, right? If I contract it out, I'm kind of stuck with whatever the contract says. So in 2020, when the pandemic hit, HPD was able to pivot on Honu when the shelter capacities got slashed just based on COVID restrictions, and they opened the provisional outdoor screening and triage. And then we started running 2 Honu sites with a combination of CARES money and later on America Rescue Plan money that was HUD specific through the Emergency Solutions Grant coronavirus funding. But kind of shows you what the impact of that, what we were able to do, kind of flex Honu and kind of increase those enrollments in Honu and Plus Up. And it really helped contain the pandemic. But also the other observation I want to show here, on the far left slide, right, we have 257 placements, 4 months, 427 individuals serviced. On the far right-hand side, from in the past year or so, past almost 2 years now, we have 564 individuals touched and 253 placements. I do want to point out to you that it does not reflect the performance of Honu. What happened during the pandemic is we lost a lot of shelter capacity. I'll give you a couple of examples. The Next Step shelter in Kaka'ako, that one had a capacity of over 200 beds, people that could be accommodated. That closed, was not replaced. Another state-funded shelter, the Family Assessment Center, I think they had 16 slots for families, accommodation 40 to 60 people. That closed as well, right? So what's happening at Honu is Honu's starting to serve more as the emergency shelter, people coming off the street, getting triaged with us, and we don't have any place to put them. As I shared, it's like a weird thing. I say Honu's full, but hey, Edward, if Honu's full, how come you're not moving so many people? That's what we're seeing at Honu. People are just spending more time there because I don't have any place to put them. So this kind of sums up, our observations and our recommendations about around the Honu program is, in its present form, as I just was talking about, Honu kind of creates a bottleneck, right? So if we created 2 Honus and we try to, have 2 groups of people, if we don't have any place to put them, we really got to start making investments in upstream or downstream. I don't know which way you want the stream to flow, but we need to make some investments in upstream facilities so we have people navigate. So recently, I think I routed a 15-day notice on Waikiki Vista and receiving state Ohana Zone funds. So with those state Ohana Zone funds, I am looking to relaunch or replace the inventory for Family Assessment Center over at Waikiki Vista. We are offering 48 rooms or 4 floors in Waikiki Vista towards families experienced homelessness. We'll stabilize them through emergency shelter activities, and then we'll have them stay in someplace other than a congregate shelter as a family, with their own closed door, own bathroom, and facilities like that where they can kind of start to heal together as a family and become more resilient. Chair Wire, while he was at DCS, kind of also worked on a couple of them. Imi Olapiha, the triage center over at on Dillingham Boulevard with IHS, that was funded through CDBG, Community Development Block Grant from HUD, Housing Urban Development, Department of Housing and Urban Development on the federal side. Coronavirus monies, we help them acquire that and retrofit that into into a triage or a clinic servicing mental illness, folks with mental illnesses. So we are doing that. We're also working with the state closely on other investments, trying to be fiscally responsible and really leverage our resources here at the city. You may have heard we've been doing rounds on Iwilei Resource Center, for example, with the Department of Health. They're looking to create the Department of Health Crisis Center over there at the Iwilei Resource Center. Dr. Koyanagi was on Hawaii Public Radio this week. How he describes the center is that if they find somebody on the street, they take them to Queens. Queens addresses their medical issue, their medical emergency and crisis. They'll be there for about an hour and they get discharged back on the street. With this Department of Health Crisis Center that we're partnering with the state on, they'll be able to address the mental illness portion, not just the medical crisis, but then the mental illness and that crisis that they're going through. So we are making and finding ways to partner and create better inventory through partnerships to make those upstream investments. Because on the other side of it, other than trying not to create make the bottleneck bigger, to the extent that we create more of these creative solutions, partner with CORE, for example, get them on the street and address their referrals and capture those individuals in their moments of clarity, we're going to need more space. So, it is an interesting situation I find myself in. Is I actually need another second HONU, but we also need the upstream investments that we are partnering proactively to make. If we do proceed with second HONU, identifying new sites is an issue for us, and that's why I have that bullet point up there. I will share that our next site will be a new site. We are working with Department of Parks and Recreation to find a site that we haven't been there to before, just to try and reach new populations and service different areas. But HONU launched, and then the pandemic hit. With the park closures, we had access to a lot of different sites. Yeah. Now that parks are active again, and probably more active than ever thanks to the pandemic. We do want to honor folks wanting to have community events in parks and not, like I said, the footprint of the 10 Zoom rows and our security perimeter is pretty sizable in some of our parks, yeah. But we do want to honor the community coming back together. And last year we tried to stay out of the parks entirely over the summer. We worked with the Department of Land and Natural Resources to find a site on Middle Street, not in any park, just so people can get out back there and be a good partner with Parks and Recreation at least. And last, I did want to thank all our partners. Like I said, we do want to expand all our partnerships in order to make this work. Recognize, on the list, there's probably folks, this is pretty robust, but I'm probably missing folks. For example, sometimes we go to a site and the local churches come out. They'll donate clothes, they'll donate food, they'll donate things to our sites. Probably too many people, probably a lot of people, I got to thank out there. But we are working that to leverage, kind of reduce our costs with our HONU program and keep them manageable. But, we also want to give people, the community, a space to engage and be really good human beings, because that's part of our nature. And when we see the churches come out and help these people, it's a great experience.
Mahalo, Deputy Director. Appreciate the presentation. And sorry, I didn't catch the new planner in charge.
So our new planner in charge is Melanie Asun.
Asul? Okay.
Yeah.
Mahalo for your work as well, Ms. Asul. I did want to ask, have we seen any changes in terms of the referrals, I guess any type of geographical factors? Are we seeing most referrals coming in from like the surrounding community that HONU is placed, or some are also coming from other parts of Oahu? Like, how is that working? I don't know. Part of what I wanted to find out was how the interplay with CORE is also, and how that's all working. So, Deputy Director, feel free to chime in as well. But I know you'll have your presentation shortly.
Melanie, you want to address the geographic question, or? Okay.
No pressure.
You want me to? Okay. We've had success, before coming into even Waipahu Cultural Gardens, we've had a lot of success working out there on the Leeward Coast, working with those nonprofits out there. They really came together when we came out with HONU out there. We were able to partner with them really well. So even though our site at, say, Lanikai Beach Park was very small, our footprint was very small, the throughput we had on that site was tremendous because of our partnership with the with other service providers in the area. Each service provider is unique. The regions are assigned by the State of Hawaii Homeless Programs Office, not by the city. But each one has their strengths and weakness, know their community well. I do know when you come into town, we deal with a lot more hardcore mental illness. I think on the Leeward Coast, we see in the more rural areas, we see more people just down on their luck. Family doesn't want them. That kind of situation. They're not. When we come into town, we see more substance users. We see more addiction. We see more hardcore individuals in that area. I mean, I'm not asking your question, but I mean, that's to me the more important distinction we see when we go out to when we run our HONU programs. Even when I see a referral coming in, HEVD sending somebody over that wants to participate with us, and sending them in from the North Shore or something like that, a lot easier to work with than some of the stability with the town folks. I mean, I think that's the most striking thing that I think my staff share with me rather than how many we do. But we do make it a point in doing pointed outreach in that area. We do let our service providers know we're coming. If you have anybody, send them our way. So inherently, yes, we do get a lot of people from our areas. But I mean, our bigger impression that we get is what kind of issues we're dealing with and what we got to prepare our staff for when we go into different areas.
Okay. No, that makes sense because I do think historically it seems like one effective aspect of HONU was just the immediate impact that the surrounding community would sometimes see. I think that's part of why they wanted it back at the cultural gardens or, other areas. And of course, I don't know if that's the nature of HPD being present and doing enforcements, but the reason I'm getting into that is I'm just curious, like, if the need, like you're saying, the gap is you don't necessarily have the non-congregate transitional housing to place them in. And so it kind of creates this backlog. But at its core, it sounds like HONU is effective at filling that gap. Technically, it's not emergency shelter, right? Like it doesn't fit the HUD definition or, yeah.
Correct. It was more designed as to be like a bus stop.
Triage kind of thing.
Yeah. What happened when we started doing enforcements, and I recall when I was at HCDA, Hawaii Community Development Authority, and we were working through Kaka'ako, for example, was that to have the shelters, each and every shelter on this island, staff a 24/7 intake program was a challenge. It costs a lot of money to pay each shelter a person and to maybe get referrals every night. Some nights we didn't send any referrals to a shelter, but they had a staff person there ready to intake and referrals, yeah, which is more of a higher caliber person than the guy just over there overseeing people going to sleep at night, yeah. So that was the challenge, I think, and what HONU is the only 24/7 intake program on this island, and it remains to be that way.
So it sounds like if we had enough non-congregate transitional bed spaces, then we could probably use another HONU if we had places to place them.
Congregate or non-congregate, yes.
Okay. And that brings up a great point, but I think, there's a whole host of reasons why we've seen non-congregate settings maybe be more effective at times for folks, more appealing, more attractive, and maybe more stable. But no, are there any questions from the committee? Councilmember Toba and then Councilmember Okimoto.
Thank you, Chair. Last month the council approved the reprogramming of ARPA funds, so to cover anticipated costs, for COVID hazard pay. A good amount of the diverted funds would have gone to homeless-related services. So, how is this going to impact your ability to accomplish your department work in the coming year?
So, what's interesting with the Department of Community Services operations as a whole, during the pandemic, we received roughly about $25 million in emergency solutions grants money from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And, in a normal year, how much you get? $1.5 million. That gets matched by city dollars. So, roughly $3 million in awards. So, we did have quite a bit of money coming through there. And what we saw at DCS was service providers' ability to absorb it. We're not so worried about the cliff this coming year, because what happened is it kind of pushed the money that we had, our annual formula grants from HUD, kind of pushed it downstream. So we have an ability to kind of smoothen out that cliff that we're coming up to. We're also trying to make investments in partnership with the state to leverage our resources, and or just leverage city dollars in general.
So you went from 1.5 to 25. So where we're at right now, we still have, or is that totally?
So we're seeing a tail end of the $25 million now. But what happened with our regular $1.5 million grants, it kind of slid into this fiscal year, yeah. So we have an ability, instead of just dropping down to the $1.5 million, to kind of ease our way down.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a follow-up question, or maybe a question to remind me. When you mentioned going to the different locations, and could you remind me how you choose the locations that you guys are going into? Because it says here, not applicants, but people who are participating, they have a 90 to 120 day time period, and you're looking at different areas that you go into and create the honu. So because this is not a permanent situation, you're moving from area to area. So how do you decide, and what goes into that process?
So what's important to me, I think, well, I know when Director Krupke was the director for the Office of Housing, and working on homeless programs, we coordinated a lot with Scott Morishige, who was the governor's coordinator on homelessness at the time. And they would just kind of look at a map and kind of see what areas they might be looking at doing enforcements in, what areas there's concentrations or folks concentrating around. It was really a bigger thought process around even what the attitudes around the service providers. Do you think we can do something here? And there was a lot of coordination that happened. We're trying to reinstate that with Sam Moku now as the new mayor's coordinator on homelessness, and trying to bring those things back together again. But through the transition from HPD, what was nice when we had two sites is we always had one rural, one urban, and we kind of kept that going. When we came back to one site, because part of it was the funding, the CARES Act, the ARPA money that was funding the HONU, went away. We had enough money to run one. We started just kind of oscillating between town and somewhere on the leeward coast, or just we went out to Wahiawa one time. But that's kind of what we've been trying to get into that mindset right now. As a state-funded program, we also get state requests too, and we're kind of cognizant of that as a funder of ours. We do try and acknowledge their requests as well. So we are trying to do that, but we're also trying to find new sites, because one of the things when you try and identify sites is sites that worked for us in the past. Yeah, we've been to Waipahu Cultural Gardens, more than probably almost a handful of times now. We've been to Old Stadium Park. We've been, we Kehi Lagoon, and we keep going back to those areas because we know they work. But there's some areas that we're looking at. We understand in Kapolei Park, there's a growing community around that park there. We're also looking at Pearl City Aiea bike path area as another potential area. So we are, now that transition from HPD to DCS, we're trying to figure out what we want to do, how we're going to do it. Can we go back to how it was done in a strategic manner, yeah, rather than what opportunities exist.
Are you finding that there's large conflicts or differences between what the state is asking or requiring and compared to what we're looking at on the city level, or are there a lot of, I'm hoping there's a lot of overlap or things that coincide?
There's a lot, there's a lot of overlap for the most part. But we did just get a new liaison over there at the state with Representative John Mizuno taking on the reins as a state government coordinator on homelessness, and we've been working with him. We've been able to establish a positive relationship, but he's got his hands full. Maui, there was a big homeless population there in the Lahaina area that he's looking to address. He's got to do the whole state. in a nutshell. But we are making those inroads, and how we're trying to partner on getting these investments made, like the Ivile Resource Center, Waikiki Vista. We definitely have inroads.
Thank you, Deputy Director. And I wanted to, if you could explain to me again, you mentioned, I know which, I'm not sure what slide it was, but I think it was this slide when you had the HONU over time, and you said, right now the problem is you can't get them out because there's no place for them to go. Is that what, could you repeat that to me and maybe explain that to me?
Sure. Pre-pandemic 2019, on the far left-hand side of that slide, we indicate that we had 427 individuals. We touched that in 4 months, yeah. And the far left-hand side, far right-hand side of the slide, we have HONU, June 2022 to January 31st. We only touched 564 individuals. What we are seeing is people spending a longer time at the HONU before we can place them in some kind of, whether it's shelter. Our common placements are on the third slide, where it's shelter, family reunification. We do find people coming here from the mainland United States. We do work with service providers to get them relocated back there. Some people need treatment or hospital or some kind of treatment. We do divert them to those locations. And some people are just sitting on a voucher that just waiting for a place to open up.
So what kinds of things would we need to start working towards or advocating for so that we don't have this compression or this stagnant, no, we can't move anyone out because we have no place to put them? What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. So one thing that came to light with us, and that we're working with the state on, is that the state office within the Department of Human Services, the Homeless Programs Office, their budget hasn't really moved in the last 10 years. Right, so I think we've been advocating on the state side. We will be advocating this session on the state side on increasing that funding. What we're also seeing on the staffing side, staffing is another issue for them, is because the state budget didn't really move, they've only seen nominal gains on their raises over time, their compensation levels over time. So we are trying to work to restore that, get people interested in social work and social services again, because another issue, if we try and do I've been trying to staff HONU 100%, and I haven't gotten there yet. I don't think I'm at 80%, Mel. Yeah, I'm not even at 80% of the staff. I have staff working overtime to do shift coverage, but for the most part, they love their work. They love what they're doing out there. They love the difference that they can make.
Thank you, Deputy Director. Thank you for all you guys are doing to address the problem that we are all working towards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And then, so just to follow up on Councilmember Okimoto's questions, so do we have kind of a general idea of how many transitional bed spaces we would need to get over this backlog? Sorry, I know that's kind of a specific question, but I'm just thinking, like, in a perfect world, like, city could buy like 5 buildings, right? and then contract those out. And I'm not saying that's a solution, but just especially as we're going through like this transition conversation, right? And looking at DLM and the role they're going to play in housing and maybe absorbing financing of housing. And then I know you've talked a lot about looking for these shared opportunities with the state and the feds, and Councilmember Tolba has been concerned with leveraging funds, and just, I think we're all wanting to make sure we're spending city money wisely, but also having like the most bang for our buck. So I'm just curious, kind of going off of Councilmember Okimoto's question.
So one thing that we want to do, and it was on my my slide about investing in social technologies, is Director Krukey is big on market segmentation, identifying tools to match them with the solutions, and part of it's the inventory analysis on how we go about solving for that. Yeah. So that's something that we have discussions with at DCS. I don't have an answer for you. I also don't want to try and give you an answer and get proven wrong in the next month when the new point in time count gets published. Probably next couple months when the point in time count gets published. But that's usually our what we use our benchmark to identify how we adjust services and what we're going to do with them. So that's kind of, it's not a reason for inaction. But I think we got some new data coming out of the way. With Samoku on board, we are looking to kind of identify what makes the most sense. If I create stabilization beds and that type of opportunities, that I'm making the right kind in the right places and we're making the right investments. We definitely appreciate the council's investments. I do know that in DLM's budget there are funds, CIP funds for acquisition. But at the same time, DCS has been applying for congressionally directed earmarks. And we did secure quite a bit. I think we have just south of $12 million towards transitional campuses and villages. We just $3.9 million or $2.7 million for a new domestic violence shelter, and $3.5 million towards supportive housing.
Yeah, appreciate that. Just a couple more questions from me. I don't see any others from the committee. So the Hau'ula Special Needs Housing Award, is there any info you can share about, or is that still pending? Because I think there's a public hearing coming up and everything.
So there is a public hearing coming up at the end of this month, and I think the final award will come before the City Council in March.
Okay.
So we did the solicitation. The folks that we are awarding and the public hearing will be around. The Wahiawa property at California Ave will be with Family Promise Hawaii. And the state of Hawaii won the award for the Hau'ula property. That will take a little bit longer to do because the state of Hawaii is going to then solicit for a service provider for that site. So, but we'll keep you folks in mind when those things come out, and you can direct folks that a service provider you might want to see in that building there.
Is it adult mental health services or is it mental health division?
Homeless Programs Office.
Okay.
Department of Human Services Homeless Programs Office.
Yeah, which I think is a great thing to consider, right? Given we're, as the county, the experts on land and land use, and then when we're talking about service provider gaps, if the state, like DHS or DOH, is the one finding contractors and then merging that, I think it's a great idea. So appreciate your work on that, and maybe that's an opportunity to expand our transitional bed spaces.
Traditionally, we've never worked with the Department of Health, and this past couple of years, we've started to create inroads over there and relationships over there, and that's going to be another source for us with our special needs housing inventory. They were quite astounded to find out that we had 63. The DCS has 63 properties around the island that focus on special needs housing, whether it's runaway youth, domestic violence, elderly, all those kind of programs. We have them, 63 properties island-wide.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Director. Any questions? Any other questions? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, do we have any online registered or unregistered or in-person registered testifiers?
Chair, there are none.
Thank you. I'll ask if anyone wants to testify, if they could come up to podium. Seeing none, we'll close testimony on this info briefing matter. And then if you could stay around, Deputy Director, just in case there's any overlap, I'd go ahead and invite. Thank you again for the presentation and your work, and invite Deputy Director Santi from Emergency Services Department. And this is going to be same agenda item.
So as she gets the PowerPoint all set, again, I'm Ian Santi, Deputy Director, Honolulu Emergency Services Department. With me today, I have my Acting Branch Chief of our Community Medicine Division branch, Kathy Higa. Again, to just tack on to what was asked about the HONU and the geographical location. Again, good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and the committee members. The HONU program is a great program for collaboration. However, one of the challenges that we see with the core program is when they are in areas where individuals from the metropolitan or urban core area, they want to go to a location, we take them out there, maybe if they're in Waipahu or the west side, within a day or so they're coming back into the town area. So having available resources within where a houseless or unsheltered individual is better for the individual because they have the area that they're comfortable with. Next slide. So again, CORE is a program that started back in December of 2021 to its current date. I'm going to try and go through the slides just in summary. Our mission, again, is to take unsheltered individuals through a collaborative effort, working with all city agencies to address their primary need of mental health, substance use, and the medical needs. Many wonder why this such program is under the Emergency Services Department, because again, what we found is a lot of the 911 calls and the overcrowding of the emergency rooms have increased because of the unsheltered individuals. And what CORE has done is done a firsthand approach to meeting the person on the street, addressing the individuals with the bandages or the shoveling that causes 911 calls and causes overcrowding. And we've decreased and prevented that from happening as we've done our outreach and our other activities. Our values, again, are to engage and improve having an effective quality of life for the individuals and to get them restarted back onto their feet. So one of the questions, again, I think, Chair, you asked is you wanted to understand our funding. So right now right now we got about $5.5 million through FRF money. We've worked with the Department of Health to also get some COVID money. We've also worked with the Department of Human Services, all of these at the state for FRF money. And in the next coming year or so, we should have some federal HUD money that we're using. These fundings cover the salaries, the fringes, the current expense, and equipment that we have used specifically for CORE. In this year's budget specifically that you folks approved for FY24, there were 9 positions funded by the city. We have a new request coming in for the FY25 budget. Our current staffing is a total of 34 personnel based between community health workers, which is our case managers and our social workers, and our EMTs, our physicians, and even our nurses. Again, we emphasize anybody needs our services, 808-768-CORE or 2673. That phone has a 24-hour recording where an individual can leave a message for us to come out and then address somebody if they need to be. We are not an immediate response for an immediate psychiatric or a substance emergency. That is 911. But we are working with the 911 system to do follow-ups with those individuals if they get placed back on the street. The hotline rings, somebody answers it, we send the services. But again, it's not immediate. In 2023, again, we've had now 2 complete years of services that we were able to provide with the CORE program. Just to highlight, 577 individuals on the street were assisted. We had over 800 encounters just last year alone, and we had 1,929 identified consumer needs. What that means is an individual may need medical attention, documentation assistance, wellness, or other services that we are able to help facilitate for them. Our split is 62% female and 38% male for our demographics. I'm sorry, it's the other way around. Just this color, 62% male, 38% female, and then our average age of 50 to 59 is the most average age of the individual we're dealing with. And then just to show the changes from 2022 to 2023, it still keeps in line with our increase of participants of gender as well as the average age. So based on this slide, again, we have 184 unique first-time encounters. So what that means is our staff goes out and as they enter the street, we find an individual, we engage them. And sometimes an individual may not want our services initially. So a couple days or a week later, we go back to the exact same street corner. We go back to the exact same individual to try and establish a rapport, to build up the services, to get them on board. So that is something unique about CORE, because we also try to bring to them that, hey, you know, you may need some medical services. They have that brown bandage that it should be clean. We change it. We try to offer them wound care as well as other services to get them to build the rapport. The data shows also that from 2022, we did have a slight decline in some of our encounters because at the last half of last year, we did try to take on a venture of opening a medical respite. As Deputy Director Los Banos pointed out, they're working on a mental health facilitating hub out in the Evole area. So we did have a slight decline for some of our encounters and because of that. We are in all 8 police districts throughout the island. However, our biggest area is in the downtown Chinatown area that we're covering. We are working on the expansion of CORE to the west side, Central Oahu, North Shore. We do have something that the mayor has worked with the legislature and requesting more funding to help those services. And this slide just showing again our outreach, again maintaining in the Waikiki Chinatown area. Our needs, what again, as I talked about needs, wellness, shelter, financial, documents, medical, and other services. That's pretty much what our needs as we address. And each unique individual has 1 or up to 5 or 6 other needs that they may need to help get the services that get them off the street back on their feet. And again, as the growth has shown over the 2-year period, our biggest area is trying to get wellness. And then this slide just identifies the wellness, shelter, the different needs again. So wellness again, building the rapport and doing follow-up, 809 people. Sheltering, 283 people are requesting the services. Financial, 124. And a lot of that is getting the process done. An individual that is unsheltered may or may not have as simple as an ID, but to get the ID, they need a birth certificate. To get the birth certificate and other documents, they need a social security card. So our staff works with them directly to get those, just like any other provider, but we do take a different approach. And then the documents that they need, passports, visas, and other documents. And medical. So again, with the medical services that our team provides, we do have a joint venture with the John A. Burns School of Medicine on Pauahi that we have a medical clinic that they run through the HOME project. And with them, our medical team of EMTs find an individual, we take them to doctor's appointments, we take them to follow-ups, we take them to different venues to get the procedures that they need for their services. Most recently, we've taken a couple of our clients for even surgical type procedures. And then last are other, this is just extra hours working with the clinic and the staff, and then also working with the other providers out there to see the services that the clients need out in the field. And 3 success stories for CORE. 52-year-old female from last year, came from Kansas and getting the services that we need and reconnecting, we were able to get her back to Kansas. A 67-year-old male started in November of CORE, and by April 10th, we were able to get that individual into placement into housing. And the other one is on October 17th of 2022, the person was homeless and recurring, and we went to get the person into rapid rehousing. So a lot of success stories for a short-lived program, a short-started program that we've had so far. And then this slide just shows you our individuals that we did shelter. And when we wanted to point out in the bottom right-hand corner, it says 67-year-old male who's been on the street for 10 years. With CORE building up the rapport with the individual, it took us 382 days to get that person into some type of shelter. But if you go back to the top left-hand corner, this individual's houseless for 5 years. It took us 1 day. And what that means is we worked either with HONU, got him into IHS, or got him into some type of emergency sheltering or housing off the street. And it is really difficult. Again, building the rapport is what we found is the #1 issue or challenge for the individual, and getting them to understand that they need these type of services. Next slide. And the next one just shows our top 6 frequent customers that we still see today that we have not been able to shelter. And these are the reasons why. Majority of them have needs for medical and drug abuse or substance abuse that they do not want to get any type of services. So, but we still try and work with them every day on the street. As I mentioned, in the last 6 months of last year, in addition to our outreach, we started a medical respite as we found that that was one of the needs where individuals are being picked up by 911, taken to the emergency room, and being placed back on the street because they didn't meet the necessity of being admitted to the hospital. So with our CORE respite program, we instituted that at the Evole Resource Center. Through that, we were able to get approximately, our average length of stay for an individual was 46 days. The shortest stay was 1, and the longest was greater than 90 days. We had individuals there that we vacated around January, at the end of January. So all the individuals were able to be placed back into some type of transitional housing. Our last individual actually was able to get a rented place in a Kaka'ako area to support himself. So we were able to get these guys off the street. We did not have a detox program. Our program was a cold turkey program, being blunt. Individuals that had substance abuse that wanted to come in, they pretty much had to stop whatever substance they were using when they came into the program immediately. And we worked with them to help them build some life skills to get them back out into the housing and get them the paperwork that they need. So 3 success stories from that. Again, an individual 48-year-old male, court interacted in November 11th of 2022, and within 217 days of our care was able to get into a facility and get his own housing. Another individual, 39-year-old male, substance abuse from heart attack and a stroke, and we were able to get him into housing within 115 days. And then the last one is a 70-year male that was a referral from the hospital. We had him for 191 days, but prior to that, he was in the hospital for 200 days. So we were all able to have the success of getting those people into housing. And that is all I have, pending any questions from you folks. And I apologize for ripping through it, but I wanted to keep in your time frame.
No, that was perfect. Mahalo, Deputy Director. I'll have you stand there for a second, if I may. I'll turn to testimony, Madam Clerk. Do we have anyone online registered, unregistered, or anyone in person registered to testify?
Chair, there are none.
Okay, thank you. If anyone in chamber wants to testify, please come forward. And not seeing any, we'll go ahead and close testimony. Were there any questions from any of the committee members? Councilmember Okimoto?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be quick. Aloha, Deputy Director. I just had a couple of questions. You were mentioning all the success stories, so that's really nice. And we always know that even if you can help one person, you're saving a life. And that's really great. I had 2 questions. One was, do you have a statistics out of all the members that you see about what the percentages that are able to have these success stories that come out? And the second one was, with the core staffing, I'm just curious, is that the same? Are these different from the staff that goes out and does the daily ambulance calls, or are they the same? Or are we looking at 2 different types of staff?
No problem. Good question. So question number 1, in regards to the statistic, I don't have it in front of me. I can definitely get to you, but I can tell you this. In my working with this core program since 2021, we've housed 52 individuals. We've had over approximately 12 to 1,500 people that we've come into contact with. So if you want to take the percentage of the 52, rough numbers, right? So it's a very small percentage, like you said. But every individual that we do make a housing and we get them a difference, what the background information, and we'll try and get that to you, is that individual used to call the 911 ambulance 10 times, 20 times a year, and now they're calling it maybe 1 time. So there's a front-end savings where they're no longer using the 911 services or overcrowding the emergency room at that point. But out of 52 out of 1,200 people would be that example. And then as far as the services for the staffing, this is a complete separate branch. It's under our community medicine branch. It is completely separate from the EMS division.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Mahalo. I'll keep it brief as well, because I know we're coming up on the end of the committee. Councilmember Toba.
I know you mentioned about branching out. What does that look like, and how's the retention? With people working in court, because it's very difficult. I can see challenges, but explain more about the branching out, because we talked a little bit last year about coming out to Waipahu.
Yeah. No, thank you again for the question. The goal is to branch out. We did put in a request with the legislature for about $3.5 million, which will get about another 16 personnel. And that's in addition to this 35 personnel that we already have. Now, what that branch out looks like is we're looking to be somewhere in the west side area to address that type of need. The part of the services is that the staff that we have and the amount of calls that we get for the urban core is very dense. Because of its dense, it's very difficult to have the groups situated in a specific area other than where we are. We're very positive and hopeful. We do have a lot of staff that do want to branch out. It does take a special and a unique person to do this type of job and work with these individuals on a daily basis. The retention-wise, like I said, the 35 staff, we haven't had anybody voluntarily quit us and go to another agency because of pay or whatnot. They enjoy what they're doing with us, so we're very positive and hopeful that we'll be continuing that way.
Mahalo for that. Could you maybe just, in a condensed, concise way, I'm asking a couple questions, but so if someone asks like, okay, how are your staff different than like maybe a nonprofit provider, outreach worker? Like when do they call you versus say calling their local nonprofit?
We work with the nonprofits. We work with the other providers out there. We work with Partners in Care, IHS. We work with all of them. We attend the PIC meetings regularly. They can call either one of us. We're not staff. I guess the way we're staffed uniquely and differently is we have the medical component that actually does the regular outreach. H3RC, IHS, they do have nurses, but on a daily basis, we have our 911 type providers. Again, this is completely separate, but these are EMTs, and they're usually traditionally found on a 911 ambulance. But these are EMTs specifically working this type of preventative care. So as an example, again, they're based in the Evole area. They'll go on a community walk through Chinatown. They find an individual on the street. When they find an individual on the street, our EMTs approach them. They build a rapport. They change their bandage. Simultaneously, we have a community health worker with them asking them, hey, is there services that we can provide you? Can we help you? Here's a consent form. Sign the consent form. Okay, when we're going to come back, we're going to come back and see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Come back to this corner. And if they don't know the exact time or location, we try to come up with a way to make sure that they understand how to do that. So that's our uniqueness. And again, I think every provider does it differently. And just to say ours is just more in that approach.
Okay. And then how do you see Core and Honu working together? Or is it a merging eventually? Or is it totally something different? Or
Core and Honu, they collaboratively work together to get the housing aspect of it. So we do communicate with the Honu staff. Honu is where if we find somebody on the street and they want someplace immediately to go, we'll go to Honu and say, do you guys have a space available?
Okay.
As Deputy Director pointed out, again, it depends on what kind of space. And that applies to all across the island because IHS, KHO, and all the different providers, they only have limited space based on somebody's eligibility. We appreciate working with Honu because Honu has a lower barrier than other facilities does. So that does allow us to get people off the street. However, again, they also have limited resources. So it does become challenging when anybody doesn't have any space open.
Okay, so it sounds like DCS, HST are in agreement that there's not enough transitional bed space.
Correct.
Okay.
That's the biggest challenge. And that's why, Chair, we did try and open the respite. But what that did to us was when we opened our respite and tried to add more bed space, it took our staff off the street.
Yeah.
And that defeated our purpose of doing the outreach.
Okay. Any other questions? Because I know we're approaching the end. I know we'll have a great discussion during budget. I would like to see full support for both programs and potential expansion. I'll just throw out there that a lot of what you do, as you said, is parallel to what outreach workers are maybe doing. And so in terms of next step planning, I think there may be areas where we could fill gaps, where maybe the providers are have less capacity, because we have some parts of Oahu where the providers just completely shut down. And so, I mean, that could be something to contemplate as we're like looking at next steps. But I know you said you talked about expanding and everything, so.
We'd be happy to do, if you guys need anything more, we would be happy to do more presentations for your communities or whatnot about CORE and how we can work with you guys too.
Okay, mahalo.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll talk about budget more offline with everyone. I know you'll do meetings. So we finished testimony. Seeing no other questions from the committee, no further discussion. We are adjourned. Mahalo.